Hey folks, this is Zach Boyd, and I'm reading to you from a lesson that I read from William Barclay on Romans 8:12 through 17. It's called Entry into the Family of God. Paul is introducing us to another of the great metaphors in which he describes the new relationship of the Christian to God. He speaks of the Christian being adopted into the family of God. It is only when we understand how serious and complicated a step that the Roman adoption was that we really understand the depth and meaning in this passage. Roman adoption was always rendered more serious and more difficult by the Roman patria potesta. This was the father's power over his family. It was the power of absolute disposal and control, and in the early days was actually the power of life and death. In regard to his father, a Roman son never came of age. No matter how old he was still under the patria potestas. It was the absolute possession and under the absolute control of his father. Obviously, this made adoption into another family a very difficult and serious step. In adoption, a person had to pass from one patria potestas to another. There were two steps. The first was known as the mancipato and was carried out by a symbolic sale in which copper and the scales were symbolically used. 3 times the symbolism of sale was carried out. Twice the father symbolically sold his son, and twice he was bought back by him. But the third time he did not buy him back, and thus the patria potesta was held to be broken. There followed a ceremony called the vindication, or the vindicato. The adoption father went to the praetor, one of the Roman magistrates, and presented a legal case for the transference of a person or the person to be adopted into the patria potestas. When all this was completed, the adoption was complete. Clearly, this was a serious and impressive step, but it is the consequences of adoption which are most significant for the picture that is in Paul's mind. There were 4 main ones. Number 1, the adopted person lost all rights in his old family and gained all the rights of the illegitimate son in his new family. In the most binding legal way, he got a new father. Number 2, the adopted son became heir to his new father's estate. Even if other sons were afterwards born, it did not affect his rights. He was inalienably co-heir with them. Number 3, in law, the old life of the adopted person was completely wiped out. For instance, all debts were canceled. He was regarded as a new person entering into a new life. Past was forgiven and forgotten. In the eyes of the law, he was absolutely the son of the new father. Roman history provides an outstanding case of how completely this was held to be true. The Emperor Claudius adopted Nero in order that he might succeed him on the throne. They were not in any sense blood related. Claudius already had a daughter, Octavia. To cement the alliance, Nero wished to marry her. Nero and Octavia were in no sense blood related. Yet, in the eyes of the law, they were brother and sister. And before they could marry, the Roman Senate had to pass special legislation. That is what Paul is thinking of. He uses still another picture from Roman adoption. He says that God's Spirit witnesses with our spirit that we really are His children. The adoption ceremony was carried out in the presence of 7 witnesses. Now suppose the adopting father died and there was some dispute about the right of the adopted son to inherit his father's property. One or more of the 7 witnesses could step forward, and thus the right of the adopted person was guaranteed and he entered into his inheritance. So Paul is saying it is the Holy Spirit Himself who is the witness to our adoption into the family of God. We see that every step of Roman adoption was meaningful to the mind of Paul when he transferred the picture to our adoption into the family of God. Once we were in the absolute control of our own sinful human nature. But God, in His mercy, has brought us into His absolute possession. The old life has no more rights over us. God has an absolute right. The past is canceled and its debts are wiped out. We begin a new life with God and become heirs of all His riches. If that is so, we become joint heirs with Jesus Christ, God's own Son. That which Christ inherits, we also inherit. If Christ had to suffer, we also inherit that suffering. But if Christ was raised to life and glory, we also inherit that life and glory. It was Paul's picture that when a man became a Christian, he entered into the very family of God. He did nothing to deserve it. God, in His amazing love and mercy, is taking the last helpless, poverty-stricken, debt-laden sinner and adopting him into His own family, so that the debts are canceled and the glory is inherited.